Nice. Well, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to this afternoon's session for Talk About Cool. I hope you're enjoying your day out there at Show Me Wellington. I'm certainly learning lots of new things going around from one stand to the next. My name is Mark Westerby. I'm the Chief Executive of the Random Group, and we're very pleased to be sponsors of the Talk About Cool session for today. So just a little bit about our company. We're based out in Shelley Bay, and we have three companies out there: Random Films, which works in the film sector. We do a lot of investment in feature film and feature film development. So we've had Pork Pie just come out recently, and got another film called Beyond the Known World due out in April. We also do lots of equipment hire for events and film industry as well, vehicles, all sorts of things. Propeller Studios is our main manufacturing hub, so we make bespoke props. We've got about 3,000 props on the shelf for hire, and we also have some event space out there as well, meeting rooms, green rooms, etc. And then Cuba Creative is an event management company. We do some consultancy work, but we also have a penchant for shipping containers, and we like turning them into pop-up spaces. So as you can see, we're very random in nature in terms of what we do. We like to cover all the bases. So you're welcome to come and see us at booth 99 inside. There's a big statue of Kate Shepherd, and myself and my staff are here all day to have a chat. But so now it's time to learn a bit more about Uber. Certainly a product that I use, a service that I use a lot, especially when I'm overseas in LA, because you can't get a taxi for love nor money. So please welcome Andy from Uber.
Cheers, guys. Nice wee intimate session. I guess everyone's worried about their stomachs a bit more than what we're up to. But as Mark said, I'm Andy. I'm the marketing manager for Uber in New Zealand. I kind of wanted to paint a bit of a picture on what the problems our cities are facing at the moment with transport and the future that we sort of see that Uber can help work towards. And then what those sort of implications are for event organisers like yourselves, and sort of talk about a new tool that we've built and was released about October last year that can help with a bunch of those sort of experiences. So hopefully it's really interesting. There's a bunch of numbers and a whole bunch of different visualizations which are pretty cool. So to start with, I want to talk through, I guess, the future of urban mobility, right? What this means for cities and the people that live in them. And how we can start to tackle some of these issues of congestion, pollution, and excessive amounts of parking. So to start with, it's pretty easy to demonize the car. But the fact is, it's not the car itself that's the issue, it's how we're using them. So there's over 1 billion cars in the world. And for context, that's the same as the population combined of Europe and the US. And chances are, if you pull up at a red light and you look to your left or your right, there'll be someone else sitting in a car, and chances are they'll be alone. So us using our cars one at a time, it's pretty damn inefficient. And of course, all that car usage has a pretty big impact on society as a whole. In LA and Sydney, on average, people spend 2 working weeks a year sitting in traffic. That's even worse in Mexico City. On average, that's 5 weeks a year. That's less time with family, less time working, less time doing what you want to do. And what's worse, 22% of all carbon emissions are coming from these cars as well. But the hard part is, that's just 4% of the problem. The real problem is that these cars sit idle 96% of the time. And as a result, up to a fifth of some of the land in some cities is used to store these idle hunks of metal. That's space that could be used for homes, affordable housing in Auckland's sake, for parks, for hospitals. Think of so much more of the things that you'd rather do than have something like that. And that's the hard part is we're pushed into that by design. by design of cities. Even in New York, which you could argue has one of the best public transport systems in the world, 2.7 million cars still drive into Manhattan every day. And that's purely because the subway doesn't go to everyone's front doorstep. And people need to be able to get to and from work. They need to be able to get around. So for many people, car ownership is a huge necessity. But it's also probably their second biggest investment they might make in their life, behind their house. And then for it to sit idle 96% of the time and depreciate is an enormous cost to them and society. So if that's the problem, how do we solve it? So I'm not sure if many of you guys know the history of where Uber was founded, but essentially a guy called Travis Kalanick and his partner Garrett Camp were in Paris and they were trying to get a ride and they couldn't get a car to take them where they wanted to go to save their lives. And they thought, well, wouldn't it be a cool idea if you could press a button and get a car? So this idea got going, and next minute, and what are we, about 8 years later, you've got Uber, which is in over 450 cities around the world. But at the start, we weren't thinking about any of these problems. It was only once we started to see the benefits of a global ride-sharing service that we started to see the impact that we can have on it. So the good news is there is an alternative to traffic jams and pollution, but in order for people to give up their car and start to use ride-sharing services like Uber, they've got to have a viable alternative. And that alternative has to meet a couple of criteria. One of them has to be reliable, and the other, it needs to be affordable. So if we start with reliability. So we've proven that ride-sharing services can reliably cover every corner of a city. So you're looking up here at over the last 4 years. This is Southern California, and as we've grown, you can see we're reaching pretty much all of the city in under 10-minute ETA. And that's the beauty of technology. We can use things like dynamic pricing to match supply and demand, so even if you're a bit further out, you're able to still get a car. And one of the really cool side effects of ride-sharing as well is, as I'm sure a bunch of you guys know and have used before, our rush hour is late at night, after bars close, when typically public transport's closed and it's really hard to get a taxi. The beauty of it is, people shouldn't be driving their own cars then either. And that's the same after, I'm sure, a bunch of events that you guys host as well. You don't want people walking out the door and getting behind the wheel. A really cool statistic is there's been a 5% decrease in DUI-related incidents in California, directly correlated with Uber growing throughout the state. So to be able to have that sort of impact on drink driving is absolutely phenomenal. The other key piece to where Uber's been great and other ride-sharing services is through technology, we've been able to eliminate discrimination. So probably more prominent around the world other than New Zealand, but taxi drivers would wind down the window just a little bit, ask someone where they're going. If they're only just going around the corner, they wouldn't want to lose their place in the rank, so they'd refuse to take them. If they're maybe a bigger guy and they had a couple of tattoos, they probably wouldn't want to let them in their car either. Or, as you can see up here, they might have been in the outer boroughs of New York, which was typically pretty underserviced by these sort of, for transportation options, because no driver would want to go out there. As you can see over the last 6 or so years, these are all our pickup locations, starting to get more and more populated, and these guys are starting to actually have a way to get around their city. Now, as you saw before, and I mentioned, the subway doesn't go to everyone's front door. But if we look at London here, we can see that people are starting to use Uber to get to and from all these different train stations. So those little white dots are train stations up there. We've found that 30% of trips in the morning in London, in these outer regions, finish within 200 metres of a train station. So it's actually complementing public transport really well. We actually saw the same thing here. We ran in October a short campaign called Move NZ, which essentially we offered 20% discounts to rides starting and finishing from any of the stops on the Northern Busway in Auckland and the Hutt train line in Wellington. Over the month we ran it, we saw a 50% increase in trips going to and from those bus or train stations, and that actually carried on afterwards. And that's people leaving their cars at home and able to still get from their front door to work. So if we've proven that we can make a reliable option, how can we make it affordable? So we don't have it in New Zealand here yet, but a thing called Uber Pool has come around, and a few people have mentioned it, I've talked to today. But people have tried to nail carpooling for a long, long time. It was a big issue in the Second World War. It was something else that tried to get tackled during the 1970s oil crisis. But it never really took off, mainly because it's just too hard. Well, one of our engineers a few years ago realized that we have a whole bunch of trips starting and finishing in similar locations at the exact same time. And he had a thought, well, can we use technology to make those 2 trips? As you can see here, 1 trip. I mean, that would be good for riders because they'd share the cost of the ride, it would be cheaper. It's good for drivers, they're going to make more money because they've got more people in their car. It's good for everyone else on the road because there's less traffic, less pollution. But the big question was, would people actually jump in a car together for a discount? Would you share a car with a stranger? From what we've seen, it's a pretty strong yes. This is San Francisco, and from what you can see on the left is all the Uber Pool trips, if they were taken as just UberX trips, how much congestion we'd have. So that middle part starts to get pretty tight. As our Uber Pool trips, and a bunch of those cars are off the road because they're being shared, suddenly it's a whole lot freer. And what we've seen in the cities where there is Uber Pool, 20% of riders now are taking Uber Pool as opposed to UberX and sharing their rides. And that has a pretty awesome impact on those cities. So in the first 7 months of 2016, we saved 318 million miles, 6.2 million gallons of fuel, and 55,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And that's all because people are happy to jump in a car with someone else. And there's a service that's effective and reliable that can help that. And we're already starting to see attitudes towards car ownership change. With a reliable alternative, these people are happy to take it. 10% of millennials in the US say they've either given up a car or not bought one because of these alternatives. So if you've got a child today or you're going to have one in the next 10, 20 years, what do you think the chances are of them rushing out as soon as they're 16 and getting a driver's license or buying their first car? They might not need it, right? So suddenly those implications need to be thought about for different events and how we move people all around to different locations. And if that's the impact we've had so far, we're just getting started. Ride-sharing trips only account for 4% of miles driven globally. And Morgan Stanley estimates that it's going to shoot up to 25% by 2030. And that's sort of just the start of it with ride-sharing as we know it today and our existing infrastructure. Things start to get really exciting when we move towards and start to develop more technologies like self-driving cars. And hopefully this is going to play. There it is. So this is some of our self-driving technology in Pittsburgh on the road at the moment that we're testing. It's really exciting. But obviously there's a few different barriers to overcome before we have reliable self-driving services in our cities. Obviously the first one is the technology. While it's definitely not ready yet to be rolled out to the masses, it's early days, but it will move quickly. We know how fast these things happen in today's world. Obviously there's government and regulation hurdles that we'll need to get through. So making sure governments are ready for and are accepting of new technologies. Safety and the perception of safety is going to be a huge one. Obviously you want to trust whatever car, driven or not, that you're getting into is going to get you from A to B safely. But then the biggest piece for self-driving cars to actually have an impact on congestion and pollution is people need to get used to sharing rides. And if everyone goes out and buys themselves a self-driving car, that's cool. You can sit in the back and you can play on Facebook or you can read the news, but we've still got the same amount of cars on the road. If people start to get used to sharing rides, we start to get to an interesting place where a recent study by the International Transport Forum showed that if everyone's using shared self-driving cars, we can pull 90% of the cars off the road, which is huge. If you imagine Wellington or Auckland today, and suddenly there's only 10% of the cars on the road, it'll be like a ghost town. But it also gives the opportunity to make for a really exciting city. One where there's no congestion, there's no pollution, we don't have car parking buildings, we've got more green spaces, we've got more schools, and everyone's moving around in shared transit. Which I guess starts to beg the question, how does this matter for you guys? What are those implications for event hosts if people aren't going to be bringing their own car to and from? So we all know how much it takes to put together a phenomenal event. You've got to think through lighting, bar, catering, all the rest. I mean, look around in the main hall, for example. But it can all be undone very quickly if someone walks out the door of a Bruce Springsteen concert, they've heard the boss absolutely rock it, but then they have to wait for an hour to get home, or they get stuck on the train with a whole bunch of other people squashed up, and they can't get home. And the first thing they're telling people when they ask how was the concert, I got hurdled up in traffic. Or maybe there was a massive line for the bar and I couldn't get a drink the whole time. So by all means, having Uber involved or having a great transport solution won't be the highlight of your event, but it'll be the piece that makes people remember the highlights. So we knew a wee bit about that, and so we came out with a tool called Uber Events, essentially, which allows event organisers like yourselves to take control of your guest experience, not just from when they walk in or outside the door at your event, but at their home. And it removes the hassle of organising buses or horse and cart or walking trains, whatever else you want to use. And this is all housed on its own website at uber.com/events. So how does it work? Essentially, you can jump online onto this website, and you can load up the dates, times, and locations of your event. And essentially, you can create travel passes for your guests, allocating them travel windows, so time-gated, and you can make it geofence gated as well. So you can say, my event's at TSB Arena, and you can draw a map around that and say people can only take rides to and from TSB Arena between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So you know your guests aren't using these rides to shoot off to McDonald's or wherever else they want to go. Your guests get to enjoy the safety and coverage of Uber with, as we know, its wide reach. And currently in New Zealand, it's available in all the cities we operate as well. I guess the benefits of it, one, it's fully customizable to your event, so you're not stuck to a template. You can make it what fits you best. You have all the same safety assurances that Uber offers. And the beauty of it is, you only pay for the rides that are used. If you've got 300 people coming, and there's only 20 use it, fine, you're only charged for that. So there's no massive overhead. So as I mentioned before, you can jump on to uber.com/events and fill out your information. Then what will happen is a special code will get emailed out to all your guests that you enter in their email addresses. And they'll be able to click on a link, which automatically links to their Uber app and uploads that discount. So you can choose whether you want to do just a portion of a trip, cover the whole trip, to keep them moving. And then once they've received they've received their passes, they can take a trip. You only get charged for what's used. So we've got a wee booth up in there. Myself and Rose are cruising around. By all means, come and have a chat if you're interested in talking about the future of transport or digging into Uber events more. More than happy to jam on this sort of stuff. It's the stuff that we get pretty excited about. And then hopefully could well be a solution that makes your guys' lives easier moving forward, or your clients' lives as well. Cheers, guys.